Okay, welcome to a special committee of the whole meeting. It's December 18th, 2024. It's 5 p.m. and it's time for Addie to call the roll.
Larson. Here. Posh.
Here.
Maddox.
Here.
Petrus.
Here.
Cobb.
Here.
Kuda.
Here,
Russell.
Vice President Russell will be here. She's driving a bus right now, but she'll be here as soon as she gets off the bus.
And she'll be on Zoom before then.
Oh,
At some
okay.
point.
We got her. So tonight we have two tasks in front of us. First, we're going to interview Frank Eisch, who is, or is it Ike? Ike, sorry. Ike, a CPA that we may hire to help council and the administration review the 2024 budget and give us information that perhaps would help us with next year's budget. Then we're going to discuss how we can put together an appendix for a temporary budget. So those are our two tasks. Who wants to do the introduction? Okay. Yes. Or Frank.
My turn?
Oh, okay, yeah, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. In the last two council meetings, we've had conversations about hiring an accounting firm with a strong municipal government background to help us with some council advisory work. We've got a couple of purposes. Since we've got a lot of people in the room here, I'm just going to reiterate a few of them and then introduce Frank Ike, who I would like to introduce you all to. And basically, the City of Cleveland Heights Finance Department is unable to provide the City Council with the necessary information and advisory service to satisfy the city's need to pass a 2025 budget in a reasonable timeframe. Because of these ongoing issues of departmental leadership and the shortage of departmental resources, access to timely expertise from the Finance Department is no longer reliable. Therefore, City Council also needs access to municipal government financial expertise normally provided by the financial department from a reputable outside firm. Without the 2023 audited financial statements as required by state law, City Council needs a qualified independent authority to validate the accuracy of our financial information, knowing the city didn't meet and still has not met its obligation to provide the requirements of the state's contracted auditors escalates the need for the City Council to retain this outside independent authority. And now, after the 9th, when we realized that the mayor was not going to provide us an interim financial statement or an interim financial budget, I think the need of this is much higher. You may recall in my update, I've spoke to Chuny and I've spoke to Ray and Associates. These are both very, very well-established mid-market financial accounting firms that come in and help cities. They help councils. The reason we're speaking with Chuny and not Ray is Ray's primary practice leader is basically based in Central Ohio. Chuny's is based in Beechwood and has a pretty strong pretty strong practice. But I think it'd be best for me to have Ike speak for himself, his firm, and sort of ask questions and maybe talk a little bit about an engagement and discuss kind of next steps. So Frank, you join us at the table and
a particular seat I should.
Yeah, right, first.
this was a very fine looking.
This will be good for
Okay.
about at least a half hour.
I had it up.
Oh.
First, I'd like to say thank you for having me to talk a little bit about myself and my firm. So we are Chuny and Panicki. A lot of people just refer to us as CMP because Chuny and Panicki typically is not as easy to say as some other things. So, if you want to refer to us as CMP, that wouldn't be a problem. That's pretty common practice. So I did receive a call from Jim. He had reached out asking and getting information just a little bit about us, and so I'll tell you a little bit about ourselves here. We are a firm that was founded in 1973. We're located in Beechwood at the corner of Chagrin and Richmond Roads. So that is our single office. We have one office. It is local to this area. In addition to that, we have many members of our leadership group that grew up here in Northeast Ohio and or attended local universities here in Northeast Ohio. So we have a pretty good idea of how things operate in this area. You know, we've had the top peer review rating for 36 years. There's 12 straight peer reviews. And our most recent one was performed in January of 2022. We're actually going through the process of our 13th peer review currently, with the expectation it'll be issued here in the next month. We do have over 45 years of government experience. So this isn't something we just do in our off time or when things are slow. This is something that we have a practice doing. We work with local municipal governments, mainly on the management side and in the finance area, helping to either prepare financial statements or audit financial statements on behalf of the auditor state. We've spent many times reviewing budgets, going through budgets, comparing them to actuals, working with budgets with municipal leaders. So our firm the services would be led by me. I've been with CUNY since 2006, interned in 2005. I actually was telling Jim one of my first engagements when I started at CUNY in Pinnicky was here at the city of Cleveland Heights. So kind of takes me back to early on in my career, brought back good memories. I enjoyed my time working in the city here. They'd also be supplemented by my colleagues Reggie Novak and Carrie Denman. So you can see I'm a CPA, MBA, Reggie's a CPA, and CFE. CFE actually stands for Certified Fraud Examiner. So we do have a fraud practice in-house where if we have ongoing engagements where we see something looks unusual, we have the expertise to kind of know how to dive in there. What kind of procedures do we need to perform? In addition, when we have clients or even non-clients, they'll reach out to us looking for fraud services. We have that in-house ability to perform that work. Between the three of us, we have over 50 years of government service. So, when I say we have the experience to do this, that's what I mean. This is something we all started when we started at CUNY and Pinnicky. This was where our career was. It wasn't like I said, this isn't a side project for us or something we do when we're not as busy. This is our main practice. So just to give you a little bit of background about some of the experience in the government sector, so audits of local governments. So I'm not going to go through this full list, but you can see we have a number of audits of local governments, gap conversions. So as many of you probably understand, most smaller, mid-size, even a lot of larger governments will operate on the cash basis throughout the year. The state of Ohio has a requirement that you file what they call gap financial statements, which is basically on the accrual basis. Many local governments do not have the capacity or the expertise to maybe do that. They hire us to come in and help convert that information from the cash basis over to the gap basis to make that clean. It's one of those things, is it worth having that knowledge in-house when that's not how you operate all the time? But we do have that experience. We're doing it all the time with our clients.
Real quickly, so all those audits of local governments, have you personally been involved in any of those?
I've been involved with, probably at least half of them.
Okay.
I would say.
All right. That's...
But between the three people I've listed, we would have managed or worked on all of this. Correct.
Okay.
And then consulting as well. We do consulting projects, which would be kind of where this would fall. This would be more of a consulting project, probably working as some type of intermediary, hopefully between council and then also management to try and get good information to help council perform their duties. So key responsibilities. So some of the key responsibilities I think council has, and these are just a few of them, trust me, the list would take up far too many slides. So councils are typically the legislative power of the city. Strategic planning, compliance with regulations, stakeholder engagement. And the last one, the key one here, and the reason I'm here, is financial oversight. Sometimes it gets lost. We want to do a lot of things for our city. Where can we make things better? How can we improve things? One of the key things you have to remember, though, is you have to have money to do that type of stuff. So financial oversight is critical as a responsibility of city council. So just quick list of things that we can help do. We can guide city council through financial oversight obligations, come up with recommendations. We can also help with communications between the city and accounting firms related to the status of the 2023 audit. The financial statements as of 12/31/2023 are due 150 days after year end. That usually falls around the end of May. The city had a 30-day extension of that deadline into June. From my research, no financial statements have been filed with the state as of last week, and the audit hasn't been completed. The first thing that will have to happen, though, is unaudited financial statements will be filed with the state. So we have experience working both sides of that. One, working through that gap conversion process, and two, working as the auditors. So, we are well positioned to be able to have good discussions with those two firms that have been hired by the city to understand what are the roadblocks and stumbling blocks that you're running into. Why is this work not getting done? And with those communications could help hopefully try and clear some of those roadblocks, get some of that information that's needed so that stuff can be completed. So you have good 2023 information to work off of going forward. So, and then identify areas for improvement to assist communication between council and management regarding financial health of the city. And then finally, recommending best practices for council to use in performing financial oversight duties. What should council be doing? What should we be trying to look at? How can we analyze what's going on with the city? So that's my quick little background about myself, our firm. I really wanted to spend the time probably answering questions that I'm sure many of you will have.
All right, who would like to ask questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I'm sure someone, okay, great.
If you were to look at the 2024, which is the year we're in right now and not completed, the budget, how would you look at that from a third party? What documents would you be looking at and comparing it to?
Yeah, so typically when we're looking at budgets, we're getting appropriation schedules, budget to actual schedules. So a lot of times we'll be looking at what is the budget versus what is actual. And one of the things that you have to remember when doing a budget is typically budgeted expenditures includes encumbrances as well. So we'll compare those, what is our budgeted expenditures versus our actual expenditures, see how that's going. And then we'll do an analysis as far as if we're comparing one budget to the next, what's changed? What has happened there? Do we have a different head count? Are we missing employees? That type of thing. So as far as kind of analyzing it to determine, from one budget year to the next, you got to consider rising costs. So payroll, typically there's step increases, there's building cost of living increases. But the big one is really typically headcount. What's going to be our headcount from one year to the next?
Yeah.
So one of the things that's, I think, sort of not necessarily painfully new to me, but there's a lot of questions that we have asked the administration. I've got lots and lots of pages, but in my last set, seven were answered and 15 weren't. And many of these things are sort of like half answers, and I'll refer to the Kane Park request. I mean, we asked for financial statements in Kane Park, but we only got back, well, these are the revenues in Kane Park. Well, it's nice to get half that, but we didn't get the rest of it. We almost need some help.
Just, I did follow up on that with
Another
another
request.
request, but I didn't do council all because,
Excellent.
just so you know.
So one of the things is, it's clunky because of the sunshine laws, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but we just can't be having conversations about things and try to manage these things. You almost need to have someone almost being a traffic cop for us, managing these questions and sort of the stuff that comes back. It needs to be analyzed, especially when it comes to this budget that we know we now need to get passed in the February, March kind of timeframe. Do you have resources that are maybe a little bit lower on your list of, I guess, you have 3 high-powered people that you're suggesting to help staff this with us, but is there some administrative work that you could do to help maintain the lists? Because you're yourself going to be coming up with questions that are going to have to be answered, because that's the whole interactions and the collaborative part of a budget process that's kind of missing here right now.
Yeah, so we have a full team of from staff auditors up through partners at our disposal, for no better term. So, what we would do is analyze the type of work that's being done, and we allocate it to, we typically try and allocate most work, detail testing, reviewing items to a lower level with review then by a higher level. So, we have staff people in our office who primarily focus in the government area. We have senior staff in our office who also primarily focus in the government area. So we'll be using them to perform a lot of the day-to-day type work. The high-level analysis, the meetings, offering advisement, that's going to be where you're going to be meeting mainly with me, Reggie, or Carrie. And basically probably be me for the most part. Using Carrie and Reggie probably more from a managing day-to-day in our group.
So Vice President Russell just asked via text, will you be able to do this in a timely enough manner? Let's just say you were hired January 1st, just for the sake of putting a timeline together. Would you be able to do it in a timely enough way that we could use your review of the 2024 budget to inform, let's say we do a temporary budget that goes to March 31st, would we get that information in time? And then how could we use that, if the information you give us, how would that information help inform us of having a more accurate 2025 budget?
Yeah, so one of the things I had shared with Jim just in the lead up to this is January is when we have our real capacity to be able to take this project on. So from a timing standpoint, we are also pushing to have this escalated up as far as we need to get this done by the end of January. Our capacity at our firm in February and March is basically filled. So really from our point of view, we want to be able to do this work as quickly as we can. So now could little things come up and be done probably in January or February and March? Yes, but the balance of the project would need to be basically completed by the end of January.
And how would your work, for, just give an example. I know you can't talk about something you haven't seen yet, but in when you did, all those other cities,
Yeah.
How did that inform the budget for the following year?
Yeah, so I've let Jim know. So we have never actually come in and done a budget. That's not something we've ever been asked to do. But what we will do is
That's not what I'm asking, though, just so you know.
Okay. So in government, every city is required to do budgeting. So in certain cities, depending on the type of financial statement they issue, are required to report on a lot of different budgets. So when you do an annual comprehensive financial report, you have to put in the budgets for all the general fund, every special revenue fund, capital projects funds, any debt service funds. So we have a history of looking at those budgets, being able to analyze those budgets versus actual, and then we also use them as part of our audit evidence. So as we're auditing entities, one of the things that gets considered is, where are things versus the budget? Are we way out of whack? Because that would indicate, could we have things maybe recorded incorrectly? So we're just used to going in and looking at budgets and just where they stand. As far as how they are used subsequent to that, I've never really been a part of that process, so I don't know. But what we sometimes will do is, if you have budgetary noncompliance, which would be if you spent money in excess of what was budgeted, it will be reported in the footnotes and communicated to management through our reporting, either as a management letter or in one of the government auditing standards reports.
What about at the systems level? We're seeing the way that they're reporting, not the knowledge and so forth.
Yeah, so one of the things we have to find out always is, what is the budgetary level of control? So, for most cities, I know that that's at the fund level. Then within the fund level, you have the department level, and then within the department level, you have to go to personnel services and other. So we have to go in and make sure that one of the compliance items that's actually in the Ohio compliance supplement is to make sure that the accounting systems that are in place and that are being used have the capability of monitoring the budgets. And then one of the things we actually have to test too is the information being entered into those systems? we should be able to have a report run out of the accounting system that tells you exactly where you are compared to the budget as of whatever the last approved budget is, whatever the last closed month of data is. And so that is one of the items that we would report on as well if we found deficiencies in that area.
Very good. Anybody else? I mean, I like to give everybody a shot first. Okay, go ahead.
One of the things that was brought to my attention in just conversations with various firms is the necessary need to have a real strong a bank reconciliation statement. That's sort of like what everything sort of leads to. We put a request into the finance department to get it. Haven't received anything as of yet. But I mean, how familiar are you with those kinds of statements and reviewing them and then tracking that information back to, I guess the actual fund balances?
Yeah, so I mean, in a situation where you operate on the cash basis, one of the key things is a bank reconciliation because that's how you can tell whether you have complete records or not. So if you are not performing bank reconciliations, it's a pretty significant deficiency in the controls over that area because I don't know how else you would be able to comment on the accuracy of the accounting records you have without being able to show how you're reconciling from the accounting system to the bank balances. So we are looking at bank statements and bank reconciliations on every engagement we work on. I mean, on literally every engagement, every audit we work on, every gap conversion we work on. We are obtaining bank statements and bank reconciliations and making sure that those items can be reconciled back to the accounting system. And so we have had projects in the past where bank statements and bank reconciliations have gotten behind. So we've had to assist with catching up. Not only government clients, we're talking for-profit clients, not-for-profit clients. It's all over the board because ultimately cash is king. And so those bank reconciliations are critical.
Can someone let Davida into the meeting?
Oh, we should probably.
One of the things that we're being asked in the first preliminary draft of the mayor's budget is to essentially approve a $1 million deficit without any kind of capital add-ons, and we know those can be as high as 10 million, if not more. I saw a document that showed some of those could happen as 30. Obviously, we can't go that far in the red, but how comfortable would you be advising council at how far we could go into a deficit situation if it's needed? Now, I will tell you personally that makes me very uncomfortable going there, but it's done in the past. We don't know if it's necessary or not, but when we're sort of looking at, okay, well, this is a budget, it's got a $1 million deficit or a $900,000 deficit, or we project maybe a $5 million deficit. How do we go about trimming that in a thoughtful way, or even knowing that might be an acceptable amount of deficit to incur?
Yeah, so first off, I don't know the laws for the city. So I don't know what is allowed and not allowed versus deficit. Now, they're in the state of Ohio, you are not allowed to take and budget an actual deficit. Now, I think when you speak of deficit spending, you're talking about spending against reserves for the prior year, correct? Okay. So I know from a state perspective, you are allowed to spend against reserves. That is allowed. The key thing is you're not allowed to spend to the point where you'd have negative actual cash. So if you're just spending against reserves, in theory, that means you'd still have the cash there. I am not the person who I would feel comfortable telling you where you should go or not, because I believe that's something that would need to be decided as a whole for the group. Every city is different as far as where they feel comfortable going. So, if you're gonna, and I don't know where the city stands, I have not looked at any records yet. If you hypothetically had a $10 million reserve and you spent $5 million of it down, well, now you're halfway to being at zero. I tell you that's okay. I mean, I guess if you knew that you're having a windfall the next year, maybe you'd be okay with that. Without having all those details, it's hard to say this is what you should do or shouldn't do. It's really, it's looking at it in whole as to what are we doing, where are we going. If you know income taxes are decreasing, maybe you can't spend any more than you're gonna bring in, because if you are, then you're just gonna be, decreasing it down when you know in the future it's gonna go down. So these are not things that are done in a vacuum, as I'm sure you all are aware. It would take a lot of analysis to know, like, okay, where do we feel comfortable doing? Some cities will have plans of, and again, I don't know what the city of Cleveland Heights has, if there's any reserve requirements. Some cities say we want to have a reserve at the end of the year, 3 months of expenses. And so they will not budget to have any less than that, whatever that number is. I'm not sure what the city of Cleveland Heights has, but that's just an example of kind of how that analysis is done.
Hold on, Councilman Maddox?
Thank you. Couple of questions. Just to reiterate, I want to make it clear, you've never done this particular type of project before. Your firm.
We have not put together a budget before, correct?
In order to do something like that, I'm assuming that, again, just hearing you, you'd have to research our legislation and our laws, in addition to have those numbers put in that process, in addition to have a general conversation with this council about the fact that it would have to make some of those decisions to give that information back to you. What type of timeline realistically would you be looking at in order to even do something like this for the city with those factors in place?
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to start having those discussions almost immediately, trying to figure out where do we want to go. But this is not a singular process, as you can understand. I would not tell you to take a budget from one person and pass it. I think there's a lot of people's involvement and input that needs to come from that. I think, looking at past budget documents, understanding what is headcount going to be from one year to the next, and just reading some items through past budget documents. What kind of capital are we going to be looking at? What is the capital change from one year to the next? Why? Asking those types of questions are the things that we need to figure out to be able to put together, I think, appropriate budget.
So with that in mind and those statements, just based on what we're hearing as a council, I already have concerns, because it sounds like we're repeating the process that we should be working on with the administration. It looks like the exact same timeline, and that's my problem. If we're going to go this route, then we should have went ahead and just worked with the administration and done the budget. What we've all just heard is this is going to be an extensive timeline. It's going to cost us more money to end up with the exact same result. And I want to make that clear. I do have financial experience. I do have experience running an organization. What I'm hearing is, with this timeline, this is not something that's just going to happen overnight. It's going to stretch out. And in that same period of time, we could have worked with this administration to get a years-long budget approved. And I just want to make that clear tonight, that I recognize that 6 of you have voted and made this decision, but I want you to see that the timeline that he's speaking of and the things that they have to research, this is no knock on his firm, it's the exact same timeline that you would have to be working through to get some of these answers with the administration. It seems like we'd be going in circles, and so you're putting someone in the middle of our conversation that we could have worked out. And so from my perspective, I'm just seeing this, because unless you're showing me a firm timeline, this can happen within a matter of weeks. It looks like there is still a level of uncertainty in how we're going to operate with the city, because he needs the same information that we will be having a dialogue with the administration in the first place. And that's going to continue to lead to uncertainty for the city staff and operations and moving forward. And so I want you to be clear about what we're hearing here, is that his timeline is structured and his processes are clear, because he needs that diligent information to make sure he's getting that to us. He's not going to be able to do that in any sooner time, and we would have been working with the administration to get this done in the first place, from what I'm hearing. And so I just want to share that information.
What I heard was that it'll be done at the end of January, and you'll have done a review of the 2024 budget, which I think is what we're looking for. So
Right.
I'm not hearing what you're hearing. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's the city's there's no duplication of efforts here. I mean, what I think we're looking at this. I mean, there's certain things that are under the mayor, under the city administrator and in the finance department and their work, which does require, if you look at our charter, to prepare a budget in accordance to what council has requested. I do not see that process changing at all. We are not taking on the role of what the finance department should be doing. They've got, in my opinion, it's a black box. But what's missing is we don't have a finance director that's able to guide us through the process like this council is used to in prior years. What we need advisement services that can help ask questions. We've asked questions, there's several of us that have a lot of experience in municipal finance, but sometimes it's going on deaf ears. We get at impasses, and I want to make sure that someone is walking us through what a budget would mean, what it looks like, what it's missing, what the data we have is missing. I've already put together multiple pages of what's missing, but I'm a single council person. What I need, I feel, to validate this process is what a finance director would have already said. You are missing this. And when you look at this statement, this is what it means. This is the long-term impact. And that is why I think we need someone that has done this kind of work, that has 50-some years worth of experience.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I'd like to change the topic a little bit. One of the things that we've asked time after time, because we are blessed with a large unencumbered balance at the moment in the general fund, is a policy statement that says you will not allow this unencumbered balance to go below this dollar amount based on the expenditures so that we maintain our credit rating. Is that something that could come out of all of this work?
I do not know the answers to that. I don't know if that's, and so one of the things too is I'm not a lawyer. So like in determining whether you legally can do that, that's something, I'd probably have a lawyer
It's
figure
not the
that.
legal part. I think she's talking about what's prudent.
It's definitely prudent. I think from a keeping some money in reserve to make sure you have it for a rainy day isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now there are ways to go about doing that. So there are certain conditions that have to be met for certain, and it goes through and you create these funds and you can set aside money and there's certain limits and all that, and then it can so there's a lot of different ways to go about doing that. I mean, some people do it with very strict adherence to the code as far as like you have to get this, and this. Other places just do, hey, we'd like to do this. Now, and whether that happens or not, then it's a little bit different. So like there's different levels of where you can go there.
I just want to go back to my previous statement. Efforts absolutely will be duplicated, if not by this council and not by his organization, absolutely by the city staff. There is no way he can do this job without working along with the finance department and the other departments in the city to get that information, which means they're going to have to stop what they're doing in the budget work and the questions that you guys, the myriad of questions you ask, many of which aren't even connected to the budget. In order to do this work, they're going to have to do more work. And so if this council is going to look me in the face and tell me that that's not the case, then something is wrong. But in order to do this,
Let's ask him.
I'm simply, so, okay, let's ask him.
Yeah,
Are you
when you've
going to
done-
need information from the city staff in order to do this job?
And to what do you mean by that?
Are you going to need to work alongside the city staff to gather the information, to gather everything from their strategies to budget requests to any departmental requests to needs in terms of capital improvements? Are you
But
going to?
how invasive is this with the staff for you to perform your duties?
So if it's a matter of looking at the 2024 budget, as Jim has said, then we really don't need anything from the staff except for reports from them. We can do analysis without that. Now, to be able to then put together a 2025 budget, you're going to have some input from the
That's on
city.
us. That's on us. That's
How? If that information needs to come from the departments, you can't speak for those departments. That we're going to be repeating that information.
sorry. The us is I meant the city staff and
Exactly.
Yeah.
So my question is, how much time do you think is acceptable or okay for them to do this while you're also requiring for them to continue to work on the full year budget? I think that's important, and I think we should have that conversation, not in this vacuum with council, but with the actual staff and administration. This is going to have an impact on them.
It's the same amount of time if we didn't have an outside firm. It's the same amount of time.
How?
It's because we still have questions, okay? Whether the questions are coming from us or whether they're coming from us through somebody else, it's the same amount of time. There's
So-
still unanswered questions that have to be answered.
So the only thing that you think the city staff is doing is sitting around answering your questions, not working on the full year's
No,
budget,
no,
not planning
no.
or any.
No.
So then don't minimize that. That's the point that I'm making. This is going to add work to their workload. It is. And so let's not beat around the bush.
No, it's not
How you just stated that they're gonna have to work with a
It's-
whole
it's
nother
part of-
entity.
No, it's
We have
actually
a debate, so we'll just go one at a time.
I think it's gonna actually be simpler. So instead of having requests coming from a whole plethora of people, it's actually coming from hopefully one source. And it's a duty of our finance department to work on a budget and get budget information. And we know there's a vast difference between what we got last year and what we got this year.
That's not true.
So hold on.
Well, it is true.
Right
It's
now,
not. You would
right
like
now,
it
we're
to be
looking-
because it
hold on a
works for
second.
you, but it
We
isn't.
don't wanna do the
17
crosstalk.
pages versus 84?
Councilman
Okay.
Bosch. So the main thing is we wanna get a review of the 2024 budget. That's the main thing. And you can do that in a non-invasive way.
Yeah, there will be certain reports that we will have to request from, but they should be reports that, and we've talked about this. I mean, if there have not been bank reconciliations prepared, I mean, and I don't know if there have been or not, but I know that was a question as to where that stands, then it's gonna be, I would say that looking at any budget documents for 2024 are gonna have less reliability. You can still review them, but without knowing whether the bank reconciliations are balancing, you don't know that you have complete information. So that's kind of where that needs to start, is where is the finance department as far as staying on top of bank reconciliations, closing months, making sure we've got complete data. Once you have that information, the analysis should be able to be pulled right out of the accounting system.
Got it. Any other questions? Mr. Ike, thank you very much. We do appreciate your time and we shall discuss.
I still think it's important. I know that the mayor asked at the last council meeting. Vice President Russell said absolutely not. I still think that we need to speak to the city staff and hear their feedback about the impact of this process and what this do to their workload. I don't think we should be making any assumptions. I still have a problem with the fact that this, or at least some members of this council were not interested from hearing the city staff last week or at the last meeting. And I think it's important that if we're gonna discuss this and it's gonna impact this many employees, that we hear from the people who are doing this work. If you disagree, you disagree, but I'm gonna make that statement again. I still think we should hear from the people who are being directly impacted by this work, not just the budget, and the people required to give him the information, but our city staff is gonna be impacted by the unknowns that are gonna come from the way that you have decided to operate, because I'm not gonna own this. We should have been working collaboratively with the administration to do this, and there was another way, and there are still other options, but
All
I
right,
think we need to hear from
thank you
city
for that.
staff. So my question is, are we willing to hear from city staff tonight?
That's not part of this right now, but I did want, there was one other question that I didn't ask yet from Vice President Russell. Do you have any experience auditing or reviewing temporary budgets?
So temporary budgets, we don't typically review temporary budgets as part of our analysis when we do audits. We do have several clients that do pass temporary budgets because of just timing limitations. Typically, they will be passed if you have a situation which you're in where you don't have a good budget that you feel comfortable with passing for 12 months, a temporary budget will be passed to get you through the first 3 months.
And the second part of the question is, in your experience or knowledge base of temporary budgets, what effect has that had on employees, the city services, things just moving as they should be?
My understanding is it should not impact city services. Now, I mean, if you don't budget enough, then that could be an issue. But I mean, as long as the temporary budget provides enough money there to be able to run the city for those 3 months, it really shouldn't be an impact on those city services.
Well, thank you again very much. We do appreciate you coming down and thank you for Councilman Posh for arranging this. We appreciate it.
Thank you, it's nice to meet you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, part two of the reason we're here
Mr. President, just to answer my question, are we willing to hear from city staff tonight? That was a actual question. I'm interested in hearing about the impact, both of what this budget might do to their workload and the impact of anything else that might happen if this council is curious about it.
I don't feel a need to do that at this point, but anybody else?
So just so we're clear, we've just discussed bringing in a third party to do this work and that impact. We've asked him. We have asked him about that impact, but we're not interested in asking our own employees, because you just asked him that question, but you're not willing to ask the city staff. We're not interested in hearing from the people who actually work here, because you just had us respect enough to ask him the exact same question that I think you should be okay asking city staff.
Yeah.
Don't you agree? I mean, you
No.
asked him how he felt about
I
what
don't
impact
agree,
it would
I mean,
have.
because we're asking him, basically an answer to your question about, what he would need to do. And I thought he answered it to my
But my
satisfaction.
second half of my question was the impact, and you
Yeah, I
asked him
understand.
about the possible impact, but you're not willing to ask the city staff that question, who would be doing the work and who would actually be impacted by that.
Right.
This is the second meeting we've discussed doing something we haven't done in 100 years in the city.
Right.
I think that the city staff deserves to speak, or are we just going to continue to try to push orders on the finance departments and the other departments to comply? This is what I mean. Collaboration means we hear. I want to hear from the residents. I want to hear from the community. I want to hear from the city staff, the administration about any impact. Let's just not say we're going to direct the finance department. Let's talk about what those directions might be the
Thank you.
impact. So I'm
Does
just
anybody
asking,
else have a
is anyone interested in hearing
feel
from
about
us?
that?
We
Yeah.
asked financial director Fouts to be here tonight
Yeah.
for that purpose, so that's why he's here tonight.
That's one person. I'm asking that in the city staff, are we interested in hearing from the people who
Well,
will also, that's not the only person who will be impacted by this decision.
All right.
Respectfully, that's not.
Well, set their hand
Maybe
up.
go through this process first and then and see how it develops.
Yeah.
Please.
Somebody else had their hand up.
I think just generally speaking, as we've talked about, I certainly would prefer to have a 12-month budget, but because of the circumstances that we are in, we looked at the drafted budget. I immediately saw that there were millions and millions of dollars of known expenses that we know we will have to pay for that are not in that budget. And that will necessarily mean that there will be a much higher deficit than the $900,000 that's projected. That's further exasperated, by concerns over the revenues. And so I think that that is the reason why I decided to vote that we should instead look at a temporary budget for the first quarter of the year so that we could then put the time into doing a proper budget for the rest of the year so that we can make sure that we do it correctly, because if we don't, the consequences are potentially disastrous. It could be the case that if we pass that budget, which 6 of the 7 of us chose not to do, that we could have a $5 or $10 million deficit. Our belief is that there is about $20 million in the reserve, and we have heard that we need to have $12 million there to maintain our bond rating. If we have a $10 million deficit, that could mean that in less than a year, our reserve is depleted, our bond rating is affected, and we are forced into a position where we may need to lay off city staff. And I am not willing to do that. And I think that that is why many folks chose to vote.
I
for a
understand that. I
temporary
just
budget.
want to make sure, also that we get through this agenda. So we're going to discuss how we can put together an appendix for a temporary budget. Now, I know there are people here
Mr. President.
that, I'm going to finish this.
Okay.
I know there are a lot of people here that may want to speak, and tomorrow night it is a special meeting, but there will be public comment. I will stay around after this meeting. I don't know how many people are going to hang out for the whole work session, but I'd gladly stay around to speak to anybody that wants to speak to us. So just for background, council did vote 6-1 last night against adopting the mayor's budget on Monday. I'm sorry, I said last night, I meant Monday. The budget presented was already almost $1 million in the red, as Councilman Petrus said, had questionable assumptions and was missing capital allocations and funds for inevitable additional personnel expenditures. The 6 of us seem to agree that a temporary budget will allow the city to create a much more accurate 2025 budget framework than the one presented by the mayor, because we will know so much more than we know now by March of next year. So some of those things that a temporary budget will help us with are an accurate picture of the city's unencumbered balance for 2024. The fourth quarter financials, which we haven't gotten October or November yet, we'll be able to receive and digest the state's 2023 financial audit, which we don't have now. Use the results of Councilman Posh's initiative to hire an outside CPA firm to review the 2024 budget, which we just talked about. Develop a capital budget based on real numbers, not projections, and work through more of council's unanswered questions. And most importantly, get us through the first quarter of next year without any impediments or interruptions to our staff or city services. And I just want to finally say that I was assured by the state auditor's office that a temporary budget, as long as it contains the necessary appropriations to cover our first quarter expenses in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 5705.39, .38, and .41, will not disrupt city services. And I'm going to quote him: "There is no stigma on a temporary budget. It's all a matter of preference," close quote. So, who would
President.
like to start us off
Mr. President,
on this task?
Mr. President,
Yes.
thank you. I just want to make it clear, this process that we're following absolutely is just not professional in terms of how we're going about it. We made a decision to vote and do it this way without speaking to city staff, without talking about the impact.
We didn't vote.
You did vote 6-1 to start
Oh,
this process
sorry.
without talking about that. We're now here now, and we continue to refuse to talk to the city staff who showed up tonight and have just walked out, willing to give us any information they need on that impact. I need you to recognize that we are purposely ignoring additional information that could help improve this process, and this does not help collaboration. And so as we start this process, I want you to know that you're doing it in a vacuum, and that they did just see that you were more concerned about what he felt about their
You made
impact
yourself
than their
clear.
own staff. And so I want to know, at what point will we actually sit down with city staff, or are you interested at all in having that conversation with the impact, not just with our finance staff, but with our staff, I think they deserve that right. I do. I honestly do.
Since he didn't bring up anything he needed from the staff, I didn't feel the need to ask questions. Go ahead, Councilman Posh.
Well, I think it's real important to understand, we were in this room over a week ago, and the mayor told us he was gonna put together a temporary budget. He told us he was gonna do that, okay?
No, he didn't.
Go back and look at the tape.
You told him he was, and you had expectations, something
No.
that.
All right, we're not, what we're
We
gonna,
told him we weren't
we got one person talking at a time.
We told him we weren't going to agree with the larger budget. And we provided a lot of reasons over the last few weeks on that, okay? And part of the questions that we had were things like, you need to give us some idea of what the capital expenditures are. Come back and give this to us, which means he could go to his staff, the mayor can go to his staff and give us a list and clarify the things that we need. I don't necessarily need to speak to an individual director when everything has been going through the mayor. So we've asked these questions and we haven't gotten answers.
So a council that
I'm
has made,
still
so a
talking,
council
Councilman,
that's
you're not
decided
recognized.
that they don't have
Councilman,
access
I'm
to the
still
staff
talking.
has now decided they don't want to
You're
Still
talk to the
talking,
staff.
please.
That's
You're
crazy.
recognized.
Wow,
Okay,
wow.
it's not crazy.
It is.
Okay, but the deal is, we were expecting to have a temporary budget filled out by the finance department.
No, we
Okay.
weren't. There was no
Well-
legislation requesting them to do so. So what?
Doesn't
where'd
matter
you
if
get that-
legislation, if you.
So how do you request the
Okay,
administration to do something?
Councilman, wait, hold on.
You just blurt
We're
it out?
here, we have an agenda, and we need to stick to this agenda. This is why we make them up. So right now, we're on item agenda number 3,
This is wrong.
which is,
It's a slap in the
so
face.
why don't we figure out, I know who wants to go first, but why don't we figure out how we're gonna put this temporary budget together, since that's the topic. Go ahead.
So when it became apparent that the administration was not going to work on a temporary budget and made clear that council members were going to be responsible for that, even though the charter says that the budget needs to be in the form and detail that is requested by council, at the last council meeting, I said that I would be happy to give a stab at it. I talked with the law director during that meeting, bounced some ideas off of him, and after that meeting, thought through what I think would be a good foundation for a temporary budget. So most recently in November, we amended the 2024 budget. I think that would be an appropriate foundation especially because it includes information from the renegotiated police and fire contracts. So those increased renegotiated rates have been amended into the 2024 budget going back through April. And so I think that that's an appropriate foundation. So I firstly printed that, or actually Patty did, because my printer was not cooperating, but I printed out the amended budget that we most recently passed in November. And so we talked, yes, I'm sorry.
Davida, please.
And so I think that what would make sense is to start by multiplying each of these lines by 1 quarter. And I think that this is the more appropriate one over the drafted 2025 budget because, at least speaking for myself, I have confidence in these numbers from 2024. Because I do not have access to the system that the city uses to generate these reports, I could not easily modify this. And so trying to export data out of this PDF was very difficult. It was very time intensive. And so I've been able to go through so far the general fund. I have not been able to make my way through the other funds. But in essence, I started by pulling that information out and multiplying each of these things by 1 quarter, because we have talked about a temporary budget that would go through the end of March. I think that other changes that I would make to this are, I think that maybe it's a discussion that we need to have about the capital, whether we want to include those numbers, because these are capital numbers for 2024 and we're talking about a drafted budget for 2025. I did reach out to the mayor requesting that he provide a list of capital expenses that he would ideally make in the first quarter of the year, and I did not receive that information. So we as a council would have to decide what we would want to do for those capital numbers. My suggestion would be that we maybe again ask if the administration would like to share a list of expenses that it would ideally like to make during the first quarter. But if we don't have those, then as the administration regularly does with our council, it could come forward to us as it has requests and as there are changes.
You
that
mean as
need to be
budget
made.
adjustments?
Correct,
Okay.
as there are things that it would like to purchase throughout the first quarter. So that's the foundation that I think is appropriate for a temporary budget. One other thing actually that was brought to my attention by Addie in a helpful conversation that we had was that the city council budget, I think that it is appropriate for us to include the 2025 number because, well, we all have talked through all of those numbers. We put together that drafted 2025 council budget. So that is one thing that I think is fine to include there. But I wanted to see how folks feel about using this particular document as the foundation for a temporary budget, and my proposal that we start by, in essence, dividing each of these numbers by 4.
Okay, so right now, we're trying to figure out the framework, and then we're gonna populate it with.
And I started to do that information based on that format that I just shared. And like I said, I was able to get through the general fund, but again, this is very, very time intensive.
Yeah.
I've spent many hours trying to pull this information out of this PDF. I don't have access to the system that would be used to run this report, but I have tried over the last couple days to pull this out and begin dividing it into quarters so
Well,
that
thank you for
we have a
that.
basis
Appreciate
for a budget. But I wanted to see, how do folks feel about using this document, which again is the amended 2024 budget, the most recent amended budget that we have, and using that as the foundation, and as I've suggested, dividing things by 4.
So I think first and foremost, we need to make sure that the city has adequate resources to function in the next 3 months, which we've heard from a CPA just a moment ago. That's pretty much the standard norm. So, this whole issue, especially that we saw today in an email that, the sky is falling, if there's a temporary budget, we know is not true. And we know other cities do it. It's not my preference, obviously, but I think we're sort of I think our hand has been forced. But I do agree, I think this is a great starting point. I like the idea of including both the personnel services and everything other than personnel services, both of those line numbers. I also think we need to have a mechanism in place in case there's a particular department or a particular need. And one of the things that the mayor suggested in the spirit of collaboration is engaging the finance. Sorry, you're gonna get blindsided here for a minute, but engaging the finance committee. And he actually suggested, maybe they have, 2 meetings a month. I think the city has, everything, we get everything at the last minute, okay? Usually everything of financial stuff we get at the last minute. It doesn't go through the right process. That really, and I would much rather an expert tell us this, but all the stuff needs to be going through the finance committee. But usually it hasn't been because it gets to us at the 11th hour and there's an emergency to it and we end up passing something on an emergency basis. I think this needs to go through a process and it needs to go through a finance committee. That includes, 3 of us, Mr. Maddox, myself, and Ms. Larson. I would encourage other council members to join and be a part of that. But time these meetings, set 2 up a month. So if there is something that was not included in that item and someone needed something, it gets included. I'll give you 2 examples, and we heard this from staff when they spoke to us on our last meeting.
Can I stop you just for a second? I mean, I really wanna work, on this. This is necessary to work on?
It is.
Okay.
It is. So basically, okay, I think Mr. Petrus has come up with a framework of using something and changing the numbers and getting that submitted and getting that okayed, which could probably be done as early as tomorrow in our next meeting. But what I'm suggesting right now is what happens if what we're suggesting tomorrow is not enough? So this is sort of like the escape hatch. It's sort of like the contingency, or there's a capital item. We were informed by the service department that, we okayed a big vacuum truck that is being covered by the Northern Ohio Sewer District, and they needed something in the budget in order to make that purchase. Well, that's great. That can go to the finance committee immediately. We can get in the capital budget within an emergency thing. I mean, I don't see us impeding anything, but we can do that. We heard about some planning software that needed. We can get that going immediately. So the operations of the city are not gonna stop.
No, I understand that part, but I just wanna make
That's
sure
a
that.
clarifying question. So am I understanding correctly? Are you saying that after a temporary budget is passed, let's say that, it didn't fully account for things, or maybe there's some purchase that comes up, you're suggesting that the finance committee regularly meet so that it could then hear those things that come up and then can make decisions? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, so after a temporary budget is passed.
Well, we don't. This is why this needs to go through the finance department, and it should be. But we were told it wasn't gonna go that way. So that's why it's been put on our shoulders, okay? But the issue here is, from a practical perspective, there's things that are gonna be happening in the city that are gonna have to get budgeted, they're gonna have to be approved by us anyways. We're gonna have to make sure that we have a way of accommodating those things. I gave you just 2 examples. I'm sure there's probably hundreds more. But there's other things that are gonna have to be adjusted. So this, just like this came from budget adjustments, which happen regularly, we'll still be doing budget adjustments on this short-term basis. Hopefully not too long. Hopefully we can get through this whole budget process and have a final budget in the January, maybe February timeframe.
So could we go around and see if there's a consensus that this is an appropriate foundation for a temporary budget? This
Yes,
particular
but
document?
can I ask one more
Yes, of
question?
course.
So as opposed to using the proposed 2025 budget numbers,
The amended,
yeah,
amended 2024.
no,
Is
As
that what you're
opposed to
saying?
using the draft.
the draft,
Right.
yeah. Why would you, make your
Well,
argument.
at least speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for anyone else.
Yeah.
I voted for a temporary budget because I did not have confidence in the numbers that were provided there.
I understand, but just on the personnel,
Yeah.
the present personnel numbers and the present,
OTPS.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, firstly, with regard to OTPS, I'm not sure what's included in each of those things.
Okay,
So there isn't enough visibility into that, and I think that, that's something that we would discuss when working on the larger budget. But with regard to personnel, in some cases, in some departments, the number of personnel is requested to be the same as in 2024, but in other departments, that's not the case. Across the city government, the administration has requested 15 new personnel, and before we can discuss those merits, I don't think that that's something that should be included in the temporary
I
budget.
understand that.
And so that's why I think that
The
the
2020.
2024 numbers are more appropriate than the drafted 2025
Okay,
numbers.
Councilman.
So based on what you just said, if I worked here, I'd already have issues and I'd be nervous. You're starting to play with personnel numbers already. And the fact that we are waiting till a finance committee to get clarification on some of these other departmental numbers, to me, is just crazy considering they've come in here several times, we've got this information. So I just wanna make it clear that, again, Councilman Cobb has stated that there are financial experts here, but you're pulling these numbers, put them on a spreadsheet and PDF to try to roll with this and hope we can come it together. And now we're talking about personnel, the actual people working for this city. These numbers need to be correct. And so we're gonna roll back to a whole year before that when they're already planning and have made hires and are already having these conversations. This is what I mean. And so I'm gonna let you continue this conversation, but I wanna tell you this is problematic and this is not how you operate at all, at all.
I understand
At
you
all.
feel, there's one person that feels that way, that's fine.
That's not an opinion, it's a fact. You don't start playing with personnel numbers when you.
We're not playing with personnel
Yeah,
numbers. No.
Okay.
Could I
That's a
respond?
mischaracterization, go
No,
ahead.
this is our amended budget that we are operating under right now. This is recent as of, no, this is.
Just the
No,
crosstalk
I'm
back,
sorry,
I don't know
I'm
why
sorry. I
she's
was
talking.
You shouldn't be doing that.
Thank you.
So this is the amended budget that we're operating under right now. This was most recently amended November 18th.
Right.
So this is the same number of personnel that we have right now is what a temporary budget would fund
I
in
understand that, I
January.
didn't.
So there is no change in the number of budgeted personnel between now and January.
Okay, now that I understand the rationale, I can say, yes, I understand and agree with using 2024 numbers.
My concern is that what the non-union folks are expecting as of January 1, effective January 1, is that COLA.
Mhm.
Right.
And that 3% COLA,
Wait, non-union?
Which,
They're not expecting no, okay, I'm sorry.
So do we want to ask Mr. Phelps that question?
I think it's a,
Could
I think it's March.
Yeah, Mr. Phelps, would you come to the table, please? Because we're probably gonna, we're gonna be here for a little while and we're probably gonna refer to you more than just this time.
And these seats are a whole lot more comfortable than
Oh, yeah,
Sorry, everybody.
just good to get up.
So Mr. Phelps is our temporary finance director, and we do appreciate you being here. Because I know you've had a couple of long nights, more than a couple, you've been here like 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And
Thank you.
and thank you for everything you're doing. We know this is a lot, big time baptism and all that. So that question, yeah, go ahead.
What was the question?
COLA.
Oh, the
when
COLA.
does the COLA take effect for the non-union staff?
Last year, they did it in September for April 1st retro.
Retroactive, yeah.
And then for the union, I believe it's like April, like March, April.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
Oh, go.
Okay. So I think what Jim is suggesting that we use as a template is a good idea. I might add 5 or 10% to that number just as a bit of a cushion. If we hire this accounting firm, we've heard that the work that they're gonna do has to get done in January. So we get a temporary budget, and I think that we commit that by the end of January, we're prepared to approve a final budget. There are no employees that are currently on the payroll that should be concerned about whether they're gonna get paid or not, or their job. We had over 50 budgeted positions in this budget last year that were unfilled at the time that we did this budget. So for any employee to be concerned that there's not adequate money in a temporary budget to pay their salaries is misfounded and is a scare tactic. I lost my thought on this. Further, if there are any department heads or directors that are aware of specific budgetary needs and they get our temporary budget and it doesn't account for that, all they need to do is come to council and say, we need a budget adjustment right now to take care of that. We are not proposing to tear anything down. My concern, regardless of these questions that some have asked, and the reason why I want us to have an accounting firm, I have zero faith in any of the numbers that we have been provided for this year's budget. I haven't seen an updated financial statement since the end of September. What's the current situation today? How difficult would it be to run a report showing where we are today? Last year, before we voted on the final budget, we got an update as of November 30th as to exactly where the city stood with all of its finances. And were advised if there were any outstanding unpaid bills that had skewed those numbers that would then put us on our projection, either above or below it for the end of the year. That's been missing. We haven't had a finance director all year. We had an acting finance director who was overworked. And the whole process has felt rushed. And even though we've had the department heads in here in the evening that all basically took their balls and walked out of here when we could be trying to get together on this temporary budget, it doesn't make any sense to me. In an ideal world, our finance department would prepare a temporary budget for us. Last year, when we requested budget changes to be made, we weren't told, well, you guys got to go back and do it yourselves. It was done for us by the finance department that has the software and the ability to do this. I'm terribly frustrated by the whole process that we have reached this point on the eve of the year. It seems so unnecessary that we're here, and I don't want to ascribe blame to anyone, but you know, for the expectation that we approve a budget with uncertainty about this year's numbers is something for me I cannot do.
I think we made that clear on
So let's
Monday.
focus.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm focused on getting a temporary budget together. I think at least 6 of us are, yeah.
So am I hearing that that at least a majority of folks are okay with using this most recent amended budget as the foundation for a temporary budget? And what about the idea of multiplying each of these by a quarter? As Councilman Cobb noted, there are more than 50 unfilled positions. That gives us more than enough wiggle room in there. And as Mr. Phelps noted, the COLA, I think for the unionized employees wasn't applied until August or September. For the non-unionized employees, April. That then makes it moot. That means that this is sufficient and would account for that.
Wait, it was retro though.
They all go back to
It all goes back to
All back to April.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, that wouldn't, we wouldn't need that until April of 2025. So these numbers are from April of 24 through April of 25. So the numbers here in November are sufficient and wouldn't need to be changed until April of 25.
If you don't have front-loaded other expenses, major expenses, yes.
So I think that dividing each of these by 4 would be sufficient then.
Well, Mr. Phelps, you winced, so please tell us why.
Well, you and I had a conversation in the lobby, and when you're doing a budget, it's not like, I was giving an example of mowing a yard. If you say, I don't have a lot of time, and you say, the owner says, no, just do a fourth of it, right? So you do 25% of the yard. You still got 75% more to go, right? So my thing is, for a budget, it's much different than that. You don't have the same mechanics, or it's not the same, it doesn't grow exponentially like something like as laborers as mowing a yard. So, but in other words, when you do a budget, you can put in the total number for the year, have it spread out, like salaries, for example. You use your base, what they make. So obviously the COLA for our non-union employees is fairly easy to do. You just take what they make and you add the 3% to it, and then it should upgrade the taxes and benefits. And then now you've got 65%, probably 55 to 65% of your expenses done just with the labor piece. So, you know, it's not a huge leap from 3 months to 12 months, because you got to give it the same amount of thought. Because if you just do a quarter and just divide it by 4, you'll be missing. And I got to tell you, sitting in that office, it's me. I got a crying payroll person. I got an overworked accountant, and then an overworked guy that does the POs.
Yeah.
And then the people who was running the finance department, this position that I'm occupying had been there for a year. My office is like Grand Central Station. And that gentleman right there said that they wouldn't need, the guy that left, that they wouldn't need the staff to help work. I've never seen an auditor come in and not have the staff actively engaged in finding material for them, running reports, because everybody do things differently. And so it's incrementally, it's not the same as something that you do is just strictly.
No, I understand that, and thank you for that. Yes.
So with regard to personnel services, the reason why I would not feel comfortable extrapolating that out to 12 months is because we are not looking at a constant number of staff members from 2024 to 2025. We were looking at an increase of 15 additional staff members, and I don't think that we're at a point where we can discuss the merits of those. And so for that reason, I think that we really do need to stick to the 3 months. And while that's the argument for the personnel services, the OTPS, we just really do not have visibility into the OTPS for 2025. And that's why I feel more comfortable with this amended 2024 budget that we do have more visibility into. My proposal is that we use this as the foundation, that we multiply each of these by 25%, and then we go through and identify what we want to do with these lines that have capital, whether we want to keep it, strip it out, and proceed through it like that.
Councilman Cobb.
Question.
And then I'm gonna go to Vice President Russell after you.
Does the accounting software that we have, does that allow you to be able to send our council clerk a blank template where she can plug numbers into it?
Do you have access to?
Nope.
Or can you set up a desk down in the office where she can come and she can do the input?
In most cases, nobody's allowed to do what you're asking. So because you don't want everybody in your system, because people who don't know can screw it up.
Working off of a blank template that we then can use, and then however that data gets uploaded properly.
Oh, she can put it in Excel, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be in this particular.
Yeah, she can put it in Excel outside the system, but you know, it's a lot of things in the system.
Right,
Our
okay,
payroll's
and
in here, yeah.
And then how difficult is it from it to be uploaded from Excel into
I just set up the import module 2 days ago,
okay.
so I'm not sitting on my thumbs down.
All right. And is this, if I could just continue, Eddie, is this something that you think you're capable of getting done by tomorrow night? You won't be able to go home tonight.
I mean, I'll go home, I'll work on it at home though.
Do you think you can get this done by tomorrow?
Sure.
All right, and I understand what you're saying about the budget, and there may very well be things that are front-loaded that are not accounted for because we're arbitrarily doing a quarter. But again, if there are things that needed to get paid for in the first quarter that we didn't account for because we just arbitrarily did it, then let us know and we will take care of it.
So if I could,
Yeah, I got it, yeah. Vice President Russell, sorry you had to wait so long.
Yes, I just want to express my concern I want to support everything Councilman Cobb just said, as well as Petrus, as well as Posh. My really concern here is this. None of us trust the numbers, and let me be very clear, I'm not putting blame on anyone. No one trusts the numbers. And I am very, very apprehensive of moving forward with us messing with numbers when we have not had a clear CPA to look at those numbers. So just from my background, I have some accounting expertise because I have to oversee millions of dollars over the union's funds. I have my own nonprofit that I have to oversee and create a strategic plan over for a 3-year period as well. But where I come from in the background is you don't move numbers or finances to someone else's hands unless you're sure the books are clear and well done. Not saying nothing is wrong. I'm not saying that. It's just a practice. Before anyone messes with financial numbers or a process that someone else has dealt with, those books needs to be clean and accounted for by a CPA. Now, once a CPA or someone is able to look at those books and make sure 2024 numbers are somewhat correct, get the information that we need to proceed, then I'm happy with that. But I'm just very cautious of trying to create something and put something together on somebody else's numbers without the numbers being cleared by a professional CPA. And I'm saying that for the simple fact, it is so short in the month for us to try to put all of this together. And if the CPA that Councilman Posh talked about and the presentation he did, if we could, and then I don't know, I'm quite sure all councils may not agree, but if he could start sooner than later than January, because if I'm not mistaken, I heard him say that he gets busy in after January, February. So if we're able to get him all the information ASAP for him to go over the numbers, we possibly could have a temporary budget by the end of the year, but it means that we would have to expedite our process. But I just want to make it very clear. I am just very cautious of touching, looking at, or moving, or anybody else's numbers or figures in a financial report before it's cleared by a CPA saying these numbers are good.
Well, thank you, Council Vice President. First of all, we have a statutory deadline of December 31st to get either a budget or a temporary budget to the state. So the idea that we could get somebody and they could work over Christmas holidays it's probably not going to happen. And that's probably, that's why we're doing a temporary budget in the first place. And why we're going to have, I think, at least 6 of us are going to have a lot more confidence in the budget that we'll create earlier in the year for the rest of the year. Go ahead, Councilman.
So Councilman Cobb was asking the clerk if she would be able to start working on some of this stuff. So I have already put several hours into this. I have already pulled this information from the PDF out and into an Excel spreadsheet. And so as I suggested earlier that we go through those numbers and multiply them by a quarter, that's what I started to do. And so with several hours of work, I've done that for the general fund now. And with several more hours, I could do it with the additional funds and get that done for the morning. I just need direction. One, I would like for folks to agree that it's okay for me to continue to work on that and provide some direction, for example, like I said, about like the capital expenses. Well, I guess firstly, I was suggesting that we use the budgeted 2025 numbers for council. Are folks in fact okay with that? If they are, then I could include that, okay?
Director Hannah, do we need to do that by motion or?
We're just
Okay.
And then if we could continue to go through this document that I passed out and say, okay, for these capital numbers, what do we want to do? And then I could reflect that accordingly in this document. I think the general fund is pretty easy. There are some other funds beyond that, though, that I think would take some conversation here for us to decide. Some of them are ARPA related, and we may not need to include But getting some guidance from everyone would be helpful.
Councilman Mayor.
I just want to reiterate, just based on what you stated earlier and what just happened with Addie, how swiftly, again, this adds more work to staff. I feel like we're dismissing the entire part of that impact, and now we just asked Addie something that I know you said you worked on, but look how quickly we just took her tape from her in her night. That's a problem for me, that she had less than 24 hours. We're like, can you just put this together? Those are the kind of things that I think we can avoid. It isn't right to put things on people last minute, a week before Christmas, when they've got so many other things happening without any kind of conversation with them. We are still having a conversation about work that is going to impact other people in a vacuum without these folks. And I don't even think we've asked Addie about her schedule, her time, or any effort she has to put this. She works for us, so of course, we're in the middle of a meeting, we're gonna ask her that. But I'm sure no one asked her about this to put anything together before she just sat at this table just now.
We just decided.
That's my point. And we gave her less than 24 hours.
Yes, Councilman.
I'm saying we can't operate like that and expect to build any type of collaboration.
Can
That you don't run an organization
Can I
that
put what
way.
you just said into some perspective?
Absolutely.
We have been getting last minute information from the administration like crazy, okay? It happens almost all the time. We got budget information while the directors were walking into the room during the 3 days of hearings. And we got constant first reading only in the last month especially, like, let's get going on this right now. And we roll with it. Now we got put in a position where we're having to do this work because of, frankly, all this I don't even want to characterize it, but it's been difficult on our end too.
That's no
Now we
justification
have-
for not asking them about the impact of their jobs.
You know
What you're saying is
And-
because of what's happened to
and-
you,
and
we
we-
shouldn't care about
No,
them.
no,
That's what I
not-
just heard you.
No,
Why do we start the conversation
didn't say
what
that.
we're going through, what
No,
we've lacked?
Because I'm putting it into perspective. We're here for the reason I just said. That's the reason we're here, doing this at the last minute. Everything I just said, I'm not gonna repeat it. Who else wants to?
That's not, but you ignored what I stated.
I'm not
I'm not
ignoring
talking
it.
about the reason we're here at the table or even the temporary budget. It's done. What I'm stating is the impact on the work that you're
I'm
talking
doing
about
the
on the
work.
staff.
The
That's
staff-
not, he just stated that half the information, even with the auditor, that we just had the conversation
wanna
about, they're
back and
gonna need
forth
that
on this.
information. So it's wrong and dismissive to say that you can do this on your own. You're not qualified to do this on your own,
Okay.
and you do need the city staff to do this.
Okay.
So let's not play the game and have folks thinking it otherwise. You cannot go home on your private computer or whatever and whip up some numbers and do this.
I'm sharing it with you.
It doesn't matter who you're sharing with. You can't do
Okay,
this.
we're-
We need
you know what,
the staff to do this
Can you
information.
let me chair the meeting, please? Go ahead.
It would be great if the city staff had provided it, as this council repeatedly expressed its preference for, but the fact is that it wasn't. And
Not
so,
true.
yes, it is true. Yes, it is true. And so I am proposing a way for us to put it together. The mayor made clear that we are on our own with the temporary budget. He asked what council member is going to work on it. So in the absence of the administration providing that, I was providing this suggestion. And assuming that this is okay, and it sounds like people were okay with using this amended budget as the foundation, people sound to be okay with, dividing these by a quarter. I started working on it because it's very difficult to do without access to the actual software. So I have started that work. I am happy to continue to do it, and everyone will see it. Everyone will be able to see that I in fact did multiply these lines by, 1/4.
So what else do we need to do tonight? I'm sorry.
So what I would like to do, it's good to hear that it sounds like people are okay with using this document as a foundation. Folks are okay with multiplying these lines by a quarter. I would like to hear for these lines with capital, what we would like to do. And then after the general fund, there are things that, I think might need some discussion. There's an account here, for example, with Taylor Road, 6220 Taylor Road. What do we want to do with these? Do we also want to multiply these by a quarter, or do we want to do something differently? And then after hearing that directive, I'm happy to do
I'm sorry, what page you on?
that. That particular example was at the top of page 4. So, and I'm not looking for a discussion right now on that item, I'm just saying that's an example
So for
of
items
something.
like that.
If we could just go through things after the general fund and provide direction, I'm happy to continue to work on it and share it with everyone so everyone can see it.
Just in the spirit of simplifying things a little bit, I mean, first of all, I think we've repeated again that I think from the consensus, what I heard, I think we're very comfortable with the personnel services and the OTPS numbers, okay?
From the amended,
From the amended
November
sheet,
18th
yes,
budget.
absolutely. And I believe Mr. Cobb suggested that maybe add, maybe a little bit more onto that. I would be okay if
So like
everybody was to do that. Just I mean, we need to make a statement that everybody understands that nothing we're gonna do is gonna impede the work of the city and what needs to get done. But when it comes to
30% instead of a quarter.
Sure, just
Okay.
let's get
Add a
something
buffer.
on paper,
excellent.
get it in there. Again, we are in this, can I don't wanna speak without being
No,
ready.
please, I'm sorry.
We are in the position we are in tonight. It is not our fault that we are here. It is not our fault that we are having to use pen and paper to put together a budget that I believe city staff could have done very easily when it became apparent that we were not gonna pass a final budget for this year. And so to the extent that input was needed by all of the department heads and directors that all got up and walked out, so they're not available to answer any of these questions. Let's get it done. Let's get the budget, temporary budget passed tomorrow. And if there are additions or corrections that changes that need to be made, we will do that when we come back in January. But let's do what we need to do to get people paid and to do the other operations of the city.
Go ahead, Gail.
I want to ask Mr. Director Phelps, do you have any idea of front-loaded expenses that you're anticipating January through March already? Have those come across your desk already?
Not
Any
really.
insurance payments that we're gonna have to prepay in January or?
When you guys walked in, I was going through those types of things with the big key stakeholders. And my process, given the length of time I read this, they started, when he did the 2024 budget, they started in June. I started 2 weeks ago. So if you say that this is better than what we did, well, they started in June. They got a lot more detail. But I can tell you, was explaining to folks that let's hit the high spots. And what I just heard kind of terrifies me, because if you just take everything and just bump it up 35%, that might be problematic because you have fixed costs that they're not variable costs, so you don't have to really, put as much thought to those as you do your variable costs.
Can you say the last part again? I'm sorry.
Variable costs versus fixed costs.
Yeah.
So I think I heard someone say that you're just gonna just take 30% and bump it up.
Look, instead,
We're not
well,
bumping up.
bump up 25% to 30%, I think is what.
So bump it up meaning,
That I'm dividing each of the
Take the whole
personnel expenses. So because the temporary budget would be for 1 quarter of the year, we are using the amended budget from this year and multiplying each of these by 1 quarter. And we decided instead that it would be 30% instead of 25% to give a little extra buffer so that there would be plenty of funds for the first quarter of the year for the personnel and OTPS lines.
And the idea was to not have you or who's ever sitting in your seat do budget adjustments like, every
Yeah.
other week,
There should be plenty of funds
Yeah.
there for,
Okay, let me,
She put her hand up.
She was applauding.
oh,
That's the journal entry that we
Okay.
had last year
Could I-
attached to the legislation. That's what it looks like.
okay.
So
Ms. Ballister
I
would
did
like to
want-
speak.
Could I just ask real quick, you said previously that I think the biggest reason you're saying that you don't wanna go with the numbers from 2025 for personal and OTPS is the 15 new hires.
For the personnel expenses,
Okay, so how difficult would it be to take the 2025 that was already presented, personnel services, and just pull out the 15?
I don't have enough insight into the OTPS.
I'm not necessarily talking,
No,
just.
yeah, I feel more comfortable using this amended 2024 budget. I am comfortable with us continuing to employ every single staff member that we currently have, and this, using this as a foundation would ensure that, so.
And including the vacancies, right? Because people could be hired.
All
You don't
50
know.
positions
Yeah.
that are unfilled right now, they can hire those people in
Got it.
January.
Got it.
So that's what this would enable. So I guess is it Mr. President?
I'm sorry, I just feel like I keep having to look back. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think we were walking down a path about this, and I was gonna make a comment about the capital expense piece to this, which I think is there's really three parts to these numbers. There's the personnel services, there's the OTPS. I think we've come to some consensus of what we're gonna be doing with those particular numbers, but we have not come to a
Right.
consensus when it comes to the capital. I would propose, just like the mayor proposed, no capital at this point. But we know that there's gonna be capital expenses, and I would ask staff to bring those to council's attention, for approval.
So I would say several things. So one, the mayor did have capital in some departments, but not others. I'm not comfortable making a judgment on those at this point. But what I did do was reach out to the mayor yesterday and ask, are you able to identify for me things that you would ideally like to, capital expenses that you'd like to make in the first quarter? And his response did not include that. And my sense is that we are not going to get that information. And so I would like to know, so for example, in 2201, I think that this is the information technology department. So for example, capital $79,000. This was from the amended 2024 budget that we've been using as a foundation. What would council members like for me to do with this? Do you want me to entirely remove this or something different?
I think staff will tell us what they need.
Okay, so do we want to leave these capital numbers empty, and then I could respond to the mayor again saying, okay, we're again offering the opportunity for capital expenditures that you'd like to make during the first quarter, but you need to let us know because as of right now, we don't have anything in here.
I think that's all you can do.
Is that the approach that people would like for me to take?
Unless there's something like Director Klingscale suggested, that back truck that she wanted to order. It's kind of timely. If we can just find out that she needs that, I would like to include that.
I think it needs to be stated very, very clearly that we know that there's things that capital items have to be included in a temporary budget. That's what temporary budgets do, okay? You do have capital items and staff does tell you what they need. And we have a very, very, 99% of the things that staff has asked for, this council has voted for. It's probably higher than 99%. So
100%.
well, except for, taking away the mayor's appointments and,
Well, that's not capital.
well, no, but that's just,
Budgetary.
But budgetary things 100%. So we have the track record that we will approve these things, and we should be approving these things, but we need to know what they are.
Okay, so-
That's the fiscal responsibility part of our job.
So I think that I've heard here is that for the capital lines in the general fund, we could remove those things, leave placeholders there for capital, reach out to the mayor again and see if there are things that any of the directors would like to make during the first quarter, and then we could consider adding those back in. So I think that I have enough information from this conversation to make it through the rest of the general fund. But going to the end of page 3, so service administration, sewer maintenance. Going from there on, how would folks like for me to handle this? So service administration, personnel services, $38,000. Do you want me to also do this by 30% as well, like we did in the general fund?
It has to, because a lot of our staff is actually buried into those accounts.
Okay.
So like you look at forestry, all those things are multiple departments. Planning has, 3 departments or 3 funds that it pulls from. We have to make sure that those are full. I just think as a matter of practice, everything, all funds, personnel services and OTPS.
Okay, so let's just run through these because I do think that some of these may not be relevant. I'm not sure because I think that some of these are that are specific to ARPA that we may not, want to include in a temporary budget. I'm not sure. So just going through at the top of page 4, Monticello Boulevard, road repaving, Taylor Road, annual street resurface, Meadowbrook Boulevard rehab. Do you want me to multiply all of these by a third?
Wait, what did you say
By
about sewer?
30%.
What did you say about
It-
sewer?
it-
Specific,
Page
to be
top two.
specific one.
This is this year's, right?
Yeah.
This is
So-
the amended budget that I just passed around from November 18th.
We're gonna have to look at the capital requests for 2025 because some of these may already be completed and not applicable.
So
We don't have that, do we?
Well, again, we in the proposed 2025 budget.
It was there.
There's a few.
Yes.
yes, and so that's why that was my purpose in reaching out to the mayor to say, which expenses would you ideally like to make during the first quarter of the year so that we could then include those in a temporary budget? The larger capital discussion would need to come later.
Yeah.
But with regard to this temporary budget, which things do you envision being in the first quarter?
Is this a clarification question?
Well, why not just take the capital requests that were submitted for 2025 and divide those by a third?
Because there are lots of unofficial requests. For example, in the police department, there were $730,000 of requests that were not technically included, but are things that the police department would want. For example, the fingerprint reader, for example, the police cars. So those were not included in the 2025 budget, and that's why we can't use those
But they
numbers.
spelled those out. They did spell out what things were long-term goals to us when they spoke to us during the budget hearings and which things they were looking at. And I don't know if the council recalls this conversation, but at the beginning of every introduction, every presentation, if you go back and look, they made it clear that they were separating them out, but they made it clear which ones they were looking at as they were moving forward right now, and which were some nice to haves as they were thinking about strategy. And that was part of the reason they were trying to explain to us why they weren't included. So we keep stating that the capital projects were not included. That's not true. They wanted to maximize the collaboration through council before they discussed the other projects. But immediate needs that they had absolutely were given to us during those presentations and are included in those packets. They made a great deal of effort to try to separate out those two conversations, but there was a strategic planning aspect to our capital projects and then some immediate needs they did break out, which is how we ended up with those cruisers and things. That's how you got that knowledge from that, is because they separated out the two. But again, this goes back to having additional conversations with staff that it sounds like we're not willing to have until much later, and that's why this is problematic. We should have talked to them while we were here, and I know we keep saying they walked out, but I asked 3 times and nobody wanted to talk to them. And this is why we're here. So let's not act like they just walked out of here on protest. No one said a word. We're just as quiet as you were on Palestine. So let's not act like they just were sitting around here waiting.
So we
They
just,
they
so
absolutely didn't have an opportunity.
We weren't even on this topic yet, and that's, it's a shame, but this would have been the time, but look, I know the mayor's not for this, and perhaps if we do pass a temporary budget and it becomes, he is bound by law to enforce the ordinances, perhaps then we'll get the cooperation we need on the capital side. Now, Councilman's right, we do have some capital proposals for the 2025 budget. And they were I would assume they were the ones that they wanted, but everything after that would have been deficit spending. That's what we know. Everything, based on that budget. So we can't go beyond that, but we can certainly do, some percentage of the capital that's in the budget. Well,
Why can't
Larson
we
first.
just take the figure that was given to us by the directors that they did finalize requests on for $4,436,179?
I mean, well,
as something that they needed to have now.
I think that the reason why that is inadequate is that number, for example, does not include the $730,000 that was requested by the police. That does not include the fingerprint scanner. That does not include the 5 additional police cruisers.
Right.
That's why it's necessary. And we're not talking about capital for the entire year. We're talking about capital that would ideally be made, those expenses that would be made during the first quarter. And that, there was no sort of, prioritization in terms of timeline. And so that's why that input is important to get from the administration. If there are things that, we could not include any capital dollars, but I don't think that that's the right approach. I think that it would be better if the administration said, there's this thing, like 5 police cruisers that we'd like to do during the first quarter, so that we're aware of that and include that. So my suggestion here is that we leave a placeholder and request that the administration offer, its request for each of these things.
Councilman Cobb?
I just think we get something down arbitrarily. And if there has to be budget adjustments, we do it.
Okay.
We can't wait around for them to respond, okay? Because we can't expect that we'll get a response. And once they see the paper, then they can respond and they can get a memo to us. And when we come back in January, we can make a budget adjustment immediately to take care of something if we missed it. But again, it's not our fault. We are not in a position to know what the needs are, what expenses are uploaded in January and February that we're not accounting for.
So, Councilman, are you saying that we should have a number for capital and not line item it, or what are you saying?
Well,
Not included.
again, I would allocate some of these capital expenses that are on here just arbitrarily, where they have one, assign 25%.
Well,
So,
Or whatever the 30% is going to be.
okay.
so,
Okay, we could do that. I could go down here, do that, and then I guess we're going through these funds, and I think that I'm able to do this. But with regard to ARPA, is there an agreement that should be removed because this is relevant to 24 and
Well,
not
again,
25?
I would work off of the 2025 proposal.
For ARPA?
Yeah, because some of
Okay.
those from 2024,
Right,
they're no
25.
longer applicable.
For ARPA. So
I'm sorry, I know you've done some work on that.
I didn't get there yet, so that's fine.
President Kudo,
yes, go ahead, Councilman.
I just have a question. Could we not, somewhat do with, Councilman Cobb said, could we not just do a temporary budget for now through the end of January? I mean, it will be March, but then knowing that in January, we can make amendments to the budget, but put something on the records now to put us through, January and start to amend the budget.
I think a temporary budget has to be
I
through
think
March
we need,
31st.
I know we have
Yeah.
to have some numbers, just some numbers in for March. But then, as he said, what we don't know about, we can start amending in January.
Well, if we pass a temporary budget, we don't have to wait till March 31st to pass a permanent, or complete 2025 budget. So that would take care of what you're saying, but we'll have to see when we get there.
If we had the audit done on
Right.
2023 and we had year end,
Yeah.
12/31/24, that would be very helpful once we have those items.
Those things I listed that we
Yeah.
don't know now that we will know
Yeah.
then. We'll see if we get them in January. I think we'll get them in the first quarter for sure. But,
can I ask Mr. Phelps a couple questions?
Oh, of course.
When have we closed the budget books for this year? Has that already occurred?
The budget books?
Yes.
No. Well,
When do
we've
you
done our last check run.
All right.
That was last night.
So all the expenses the city is going to incur and pay this year, that's already been done.
We can incur expenses, but we can't.
In
we're not
terms of
gonna pay
paying.
them.
the books are closed, essentially, right? We paid all,
No, it's two different things. You can accrue expenses, and the CPA just told the whole, everybody in here that you
Right.
it's on the accrual basis. So you can accrue the expenses, but you don't have to, you're not gonna pay them.
in January of last year, we got the expenses for the prior year. Do you expect that we will get that report in January?
We'll give you
You don't know.
every report, no, we'll give you every report that you're accustomed to.
All right.
Yeah.
And is there a report available that shows us where we were through November 30th of this year? Has that report been run?
I just posted October and November expenses yesterday.
Do you know when you'll get those reports to council?
I'm probably gonna need another week because I gotta review them. I can't give you garbage.
And again, that's been one of the concerns, and I
Every-
understand that
all
you've been
reports gotta
dumped
be
into a
reviewed.
bad situation.
Yeah, our report's gotta be reviewed.
Okay, so I think that I have enough information here to continue working through this. I think that by 9 a.m., I should be able to get through the rest. I will send it out. This is with the exception of the ARPA section, which would be based on the drafted 2025 budget. Everything else would be based on this amended 2024 budget. And I can send that out by the morning.
As of tomorrow, every ARPA dollar will be encumbered, am I wrong about that?
No, we
Okay, because you,
No,
Okay.
that wasn't for that reason,
Okay.
sorry.
and,
No, we're good,
yeah, because we have a couple more things to vote on.
we're good.
And so that should be crystal clear in that moment. And then, so is there anything else we need to accomplish tonight? Go ahead.
I actually think there is one other issue. And, for, what our budget was, 130 million last year, ballpark. For the number, I'm just gonna editorialize, but I think the finance department needs to ask for a whole lot more resources to get stuff done. You do not have the resources to do your job, which is what we've been told with the other, from the other interim. And we've seen this work. So, and I know that there's two layers of there's no chief administrative officer. Hopefully that position is gonna be filled very, very shortly. But we need someone that has some experience in this building that understands you are understaffed and you need more resources, and someone needs to bring someone on immediately to give you some help. You
I agree
can't,
with that.
you can't do this,
All in favor?
it's just willfully just ignorant of how things work
Yeah.
in a large organization.
I just wish in the future, you wouldn't assume that there's no sense of urgency coming at the end when the mayor himself has said multiple times. You make these statements and it's just very difficult to find this common ground with you because you make these blatant statements that are insulting and condescending and aren't true. You've heard the mayor himself already state that they need to ramp up and staff that up. But you say these things, I don't know if you say them because the public is watching, I don't know if you say them because you're not paying attention, I don't know. But it makes it hard to find common ground with you when I can sit here knowing I've heard these things and you act like it doesn't happen. It's just very difficult to find a way to collaborate with someone who makes statements like that, especially when you know it's not even his responsibility to do that. So why even make a statement like that other than to be insulting and to continue to bridge
was a
that
statement
gap?
of
I just
So,
wanna,
I'm just
I
saying
understand.
there's a way you can articulate
we
things.
gotta
We're
wrap.
choosing to do this and it's getting worse the closer we're getting to next year's election. So
So
we need to stop.
we're solid on what, so tomorrow, the objective is to have
Exhibit A.
Exhibit A for the legislation that the law director wrote up.
Yes.
And that'll be on second reading.
Yes.
And it would be good, I know, that this happens all the time, but we'll get that emailed out to council, hopefully in the morning. And then, so our next meeting, did somebody else wanna say something?
Yeah, just real quick,
Cause I don't,
sorry to make this more complicated. What about the pension funds, just writing
It's
that out?
going to multiply it by
Okay.
30%. unless we make like one contribution for an entire year.
Which will have to
If
do an
it
amendment.
worked that way.
We'll have to do an
Okay.
amendment.
Yeah, please.
I would like to say thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate this.
Yeah, I
And
mean-
Addie, thank you.
Yes, I mean, I know this is difficult, and Mr. Feltz, you know, we so appreciate you, and we know,
No problem.
we know how difficult this is, and hopefully we can, I don't know, make this as less painful as it could be. So tomorrow, hopefully we'll have everything in place there, and I think we know what's in, and and everybody look out, there are gonna be a few pieces of legislation that kind of came in last minute that are gonna be also on the agenda for tomorrow. So, you know, we'll just all have to kind of roll with that as we usually do. And,
Councilman Cooley?
oh, yes. Go ahead.
Just have a question. Are we gonna entertain anything regarding the CPA tomorrow, or is Councilman Posh have someone else for us to look at, or what are we doing with that? I saw the presentation today, but I didn't hear you mention it for us.
That's a
First
good
reading
question.
legislation, or what's the purpose?
So I have discussed with the law director about having legislation available for us to vote.
So we're not gonna interview another,
I don't have anybody else to interview.
you know, okay. So there's your answer. Any additional questions?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear him.
Oh, he said that he's gonna have the law director write up legislation for hiring the CPA that spoke today.
That's for tomorrow?
Yes, for tomorrow. All right,
So is the decision made, we're gonna hire him, is that?
well, I mean, that would happen tomorrow.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
So no more interviews, we're okay with that,
that
just,
would happen tomorrow. Well, if the council decides as a whole that we wanna interview more people, I guess we'll do that tomorrow.
I was just curious, it sounds like there isn't, because we would have to do the interview tomorrow, so I just wanna know what I'm walking into.
Well, what I mean is that if council doesn't wanna go ahead with the so we're gonna have it sitting in front of us tomorrow.
Mhm.
And I don't know if people are gonna say, you know what, I don't wanna vote on this because we need to interview more, that would be decided tomorrow,
Okay, just
you
curious.
know. All right, so let's see. This meeting is adjourned at 6:51.